Here, it's tomato. It's not much, but it's hot. She crouched down and held the paper cup with both hands, the way you hand something to a person when you want them to know it comes without conditions. The man on the concrete ledge outside St. Maron's emergency entrance looked up slowly. He was wearing a weathered canvas jacket, a wool cap pulled low, and the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have learned not to expect anything from strangers. He took the cup. His hands were cold, she noticed. Her name was Celeste Pruitt, 27 years old, 3 years into her nursing career, 2 of them spent on the overnight ER floor, where the fluorescent lights never quite let you forget what hour it was. She had bought that soup from the vending cart across the street, using the last $4 in her jacket packet, money she'd set aside for a bus ride home after a 10-hour shift that had stretched to 13. She would walk home. It was fine. It was only 12 blocks. The man smiled at her, and it was such an unexpected smile, full and genuine, and a little surprised, like someone remembering something they thought they'd lost, that she paused on her way back through the sliding doors. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know," she said, and she went inside.
His name was Sawyer Lind, 33. He had been sitting on that ledge for 40 minutes, not because he had nowhere to go, but because he had needed to sit somewhere that wasn't a boardroom, a car, or a hotel suite. He had arrived in town for a private meeting with St. Maron's Hospital Board, a meeting about the naming rights on the new cardiac wing, which his foundation was funding to the tune of $8 million. He had asked his driver to drop him 2 blocks early. He did this sometimes in new cities, just to walk, just to feel like a person rather than a portfolio. He had not expected the cold to settle so fast, or to find himself sitting, or to have a young woman in scrubs appear with a cup of tomato soup and eyes that held not a trace of recognition, only the simple, clean impulse to make sure he was warm. He held the cup until it was empty and thought about the last time a stranger had done something kind for him without knowing who he was. He couldn't find the memory. It had been that long. Celeste was at the nurse's station 20 minutes later when her charge nurse, Deborah Fain, leaned over with the particular look she reserved for things worth whispering. "The Lind Foundation donor is here. Board meeting in the morning. They say he's the one funding the cardiac wing." She paused. Apparently, he was sitting outside for a while. Someone gave him soup. Celeste looked up from her chart. Something moved quietly across her face. "Is he all right?" "He's fine, more than fine," Deborah smiled. "He asked who the nurse was." She found out the following morning, not dramatically, not in a grand reveal, but in the way real things unfold, simply and a little sideways. Sawyer Lind stopped by the nurse's station before his board meeting, still wearing the canvas jacket. He looked different in the daylight, and yet exactly the same. "I wanted to say thank you, properly," he said. Celeste studied him for a moment. Then it landed. Until it landed. "That was you," she said.
That was me. She didn't apologize for not recognizing him. He didn't expect her to. What passed between them in that hallway was something quieter and more honest than embarrassment, a kind of mutual acknowledgement that the soup had happened before any of this context existed, and that made it the truest thing about the morning. "I was going to walk home," she admitted. "It was the last of my cash." Sawyer was quiet for a moment. "Then I owe you a bus fare and an apology for the inconvenience." "You don't owe me anything," she said simply. "You looked cold." He looked at her steadily. "Do you know how rare that is? To just help someone because they look cold?" She thought of her mother, who had raised her in a small Tennessee house where the rule was always feed the neighbor before you feed yourself if they need it more. She thought of the 13-hour shift. She thought of 12 blocks in November wind. "Not rare," she said softly. "Just quiet.
Most people do it quietly. He carried that sentence into the board meeting and couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 weeks later, the hospital received an additional grant, unannounced, directed specifically toward nurse retention, overnight shift compensation, and staff wellness. No press release, no naming rights, just a wire transfer and a single note that read, "For the people who stay when the hours get long."
Celeste never connected it to him directly, not until Deborah showed her the note 6 months later, and even then she was quiet for a long time before she said anything. "He didn't have to do that," she said softly, the same words he had said to her on the cold concrete ledge outside the ER doors. She smiled and understood. Kindness doesn't keep score. It just moves forward, and somewhere down the road it comes back wearing different clothes. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.